Hello, my name is Sarda, and this will be my book review of Ecological Intelligence, The Hidden Impacts of What We Buy by Daniel Goleman. And I think to start off, I just want to give a little background information about the author. Before he wrote Ecological Intelligence, he also wrote a book called Social Intelligence and a book called Emotional Intelligence. And he used his experience as a psychologist to kind of write those two books and this book as well. He also used to be a scientific journalist for the New York Times, so he probably had some background information from that as well to help write these books. I also think it's important to mention the resources and references that he had in this book because in the very beginning chapter of the book, he states that when he started his writing process, he wasn't really sure where it was going to go, and he wasn't really sure what to do with his thoughts because he didn't have a lot of information other than what he wanted to write the book about. So throughout the book, we see him use different studies from esteemed universities like Harvard and the University of Wisconsin, even. And he also talks to different professors, people in charge of buying things for those universities. He talks to business managers, entrepreneurs, all these people that are embedded into big businesses. So I think that that is something that's important to mention. That's who he uses for most of the information that's mentioned in the book. Now, before we get a little deeper into the book, I think it's important to talk about how does Daniel Goleman define ecological intelligence, because his book is essentially this theory that ecological intelligence will help us as consumers lower our carbon footprint collectively. And if we work together with business, we can change the entire idea of shopping, which it's a very good theory. He uses the first thing he uses to define what ecological intelligence is, or having an ecological intelligence as a shopper, is to be an active thinker rather than going off of our basic survival instincts that we as humans just naturally have. He states that we need to be thinking more about the long-term effects of what product we're going to buy rather than seeing what is right on the packaging and thinking, how will this solve my problem now? How is this cheaper to buy now? Um, and rather, we need to think, how will this save me money in the future if I buy something that was sustainable, even if it cost more at that time? So that's really the first idea of ecological intelligence. And then the second idea is kind of defining sustainability. So at first he defines sustainability as, well, this item could be sustainably made if it was made using clean energy. But then he questions, well, how far does it have to go for the item? He introduces LCAs, which talk about the life cycle assessment of an item. So he uses a glass jar as his first example. The sand from that glass jar was taken from a beach somewhere. How was that sand extracted? How was it transported to a facility? How was it manufactured in that facility? How was it then transported to the store? How was it transported to the home? How was it used in the home? How was it disposed of in the home? So he kind of broadens the view of what sustainability really means in terms of manufacturing and gathering the materials for making certain items. And then the most important point that he stresses a lot in this book about ecological intelligence is this idea of radical transparency in the marketplace, which means that if businesses decide to actually disclose what they're putting into their products and how they're making those products, it will create a better marketplace for everyone. And he says that it's actually better if it's not government mandated. And he uses studies to show that it's been proven that companies that openly disclose, hey, these towels, for example, he uses towels. It was an experiment in a store where they had towels that were more expensive because they were made sustainably and towels that were less expensive because they weren't. And the customers actually went for the more sustainable towels. So this idea that if companies actually openly say, hey, we're charging you more because we use clean energy to make this product, there was no child labor, the transportation was clean, the extraction of the materials was clean. So we're asking for more money because this was made sustainably. And we're hoping that we can build a business off of this sustainability and we can encourage others to do so. And so that's this idea of radical transparency, that the marketplace, these businesses disclose the sustainability to the customers, and then they get a very good level of feedback from those customers because they are impressed by the fact that the company is taking those steps. And so he talks about how radical transparency can then evolve into cycles of business. So customers are actually more likely to switch from a company that has been found out to be using bad practices through the media or through friends and family, however they find out. They're actually more likely to boycott that company than they are to go out and look for companies that make products sustainably. Because in our current marketplace, it's very difficult to get reliable data on, is this really sustainable? There was another study shown that lots of products with eco-friendly stickers were actually less friendly than just the generic brands. So this idea of radical transparency also changes the fact that it is so difficult for consumers to get information about whether the product was made sustainably and whether that information is actually legit. Um, and after he kind of talks about radical transparency, he introduces different apps and programs that some of his colleagues are working on about creating databases where that information is stored and readily available, kind of increasing the range of the transparency. Because if you know everything about a product, um, it'll be it'll make the shopping easier. And he also says that when the businesses know what their customers want, and everyone has access to the information, it allows the businesses to be more open with their customers. And it also allows those businesses to be more motivated to create innovation. And when they already have that motivation for innovative ideas, there will be so much more innovation and so much more, they'll be more inspired to be using sustainable methods and looking for different places in the manufacturing chain where they can use sustainable practices. So this idea that radical transparency improves the marketplace for both customers and businesses in different ways. And from there, he kind of leads into consumerism and why consumerism is important and how much power we really have as consumers. It's kind of the second main idea of the book. So he talks about the fact that there will always be so much more consumers than there will be businesses, people in charge of those businesses, people even working for those businesses. So he kind of talks about this fact that we as consumers collectively have more power than the businesses. We just don't really know how to utilize it and we don't know how to work together. And that's partially because of the marketplace that the businesses have essentially created for us. Um, and going back to radical transparency, his main idea on consumerism is that an informed public will lead to greater change. So, kind of still promoting the radical transparency in the marketplace there. He also mentions that market standards are a very difficult task because when it comes to sustainability and environmental practices, how can you make standards not only for a country but for the globe when there hasn't been an official value declared on the environment? So this is just kind of something he mentions that marketplaces and businesses that want to promote sustainability are kind of struggling with because there are no market standards and they don't know where they stand really. He also talks about how globalism creates complications within this system of radical transparency. Um, because if a company is global and they're the only one supplying a product, they don't have to change their practices for a customer. Because if the customer can't go anywhere else, they have no choice but to stick with the company that may be using child labor, or the company that may be responsible for 20% of the carbon emissions for a certain country. So he kind of talks about how globalism is a challenge that radical transparency faces. He also talks about the fact that business is so difficult to change because it starts with price and it starts with unethical practices because that's how businesses are built and that's how they're maintained. So he talks about how another challenge that radical transparency faces is the fact that We need to help these businesses change their entire mind state of how they got their fortune from not caring only about price, but changing it about caring about our customers and what our customers want. And how can we embed ethical practices into the act of making money? So it's another main point of the book is consumerism and how we can use consumerism to change the marketplace and to limit global warming as a collective effort. I think the audience that this book was written for was everyone, but mainly consumers. I mean, we are all consumers, but he emphasizes people who shop a lot and how you can improve your shopping habits. But it's not only a book for the shoppers, it's a book for the sellers. So if a business person reads this book, they can start thinking about radical transparency and how that could affect their business and maybe um, get the level of their business up more, not only in the eyes of the public, but they can make money off of sustainability, is this other idea in the book. And also, I think government officials a little bit, he mentions that the the reason that radical transparency works so well in theory is because the government is so slow about making changes, especially when it comes to environmental standards, and also like implementing those changes. And not only is it slow for them to begin to make that change, but once that change has been made, changing the entire country that that government is operating in is such a difficult task and a long task, and there'll be protests, and it's just very difficult to rely on the government for things like this. Um, my critique of the book itself, I think it was very well written, and I enjoyed reading about his theory and how his theory evolved, although I do think that it was very repetitive. And while the repetitiveness did help the book, you know, it helped me rethink about these ideas and how they apply to different things and remember what he was talking about in the beginning of the book. I think it did get a little old towards the end. He just kind of kept saying the same things. The ideas, while it was well put together, there was some ideas that were very spread out that I don't think should have been because I think they kind of went hand in hand. Um, but other than that, it was a very convincing book. I really enjoyed reading about it. It made me think about, you know, being a consumer and how I can change my options and how I can use these different tools that he mentions, like these apps and these websites and programs. And I think he had very good evidence for backing up his theory, that he mentions evidence in every chapter, and I think that that's an important thing for you know, presenting this theory of ecological intelligence. So I would very highly recommend this book. It's not too long, and I think it's very important as a consumer to read a book like this. So thank you.